The screech of tearing metal is not just a sound, it is a physical sensation that vibrates through your teeth and settles deep into your marrow. It is a violent disruption of reality. One second, I was driving down the familiar stretch of Elm Street, running through a mundane mental checklist. I was thinking about the massive supply chain logistics report I needed to finish by Monday for my regional director role. I was thinking about whether I should thaw the chicken for dinner. Most importantly, I was thinking about Romy, my precious 6-week-old daughter. I had left her at home with Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor, just so I could make a frantic 20-minute dash to the pharmacy to pick up some postpartum vitamins. Mrs. Gable was a sweet, gentle woman, but she was profoundly hard of hearing and physically fragile. She had explicitly told me she could only watch Romy for half an hour. She did not know how to handle a crying newborn, and Romy was exclusively breastfed. I was supposed to be right back. I was supposed to walk through my front door, scoop my baby into my arms, and continue my perfectly ordinary Thursday. Instead, a heavy commercial delivery truck, driven by a man who later admitted he was distracted by his phone, blew through a solid red light at 60 miles per hour. He T-boned my SUV directly on the driver's side. There was no time to swerve. There was no time to scream. There was only the blinding explosion of the airbags, the shattering of tempered glass, and the violent, spinning chaos as my vehicle was thrown across 4 lanes of traffic like a discarded toy. When the spinning finally stopped, an eerie, suffocating silence descended over the wreckage. I woke up trapped inside a crushed metal box that used to be my car. I could taste the sharp, metallic tang of blood in my mouth. Dust from the deployed airbags coated my throat, making every breath a desperate, choking gasp. My left leg was pinned immovably under the crumpled dashboard, radiating a dull, throbbing ache that told me the bone was shattered. But the worst pain was in my chest. Every time I tried to inhale, it felt as though someone was driving jagged shards of glass into my lungs. Yet, the agonizing physical trauma was entirely overshadowed by a sudden, ice-cold wave of pure terror that gripped my heart. Romy. She was at home. She was waiting for me. She was going to be hungry soon, and Mrs. Gable would panic. Through the shattered window, I could hear the distant wail of sirens growing louder. People were shouting, running toward my car, telling me not to move. A paramedic in a bright yellow jacket finally pried the passenger door open, crawling inside the wreckage to reach me. She had kind, determined eyes. She pressed a thick gauze pad against a deep gash on my forehead, telling me they were bringing the hydraulic tools to cut me out. She told me my vitals were unstable. She told me I was going straight to the trauma center. I grabbed her wrist, my fingers leaving bloody smears on her sleeve. My phone, I gasped, the words tearing at my throat. Please. I need my phone. My baby is at home. She found my phone on the floorboard. The screen was spider-webbed with cracks, but by some miracle, it still turned on. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely swipe to unlock it. My husband, Hayes, was in Chicago on a massive corporate audit. He was 3 states away, impossible to reach for an immediate physical rescue. I had no other family nearby except for my parents, who lived an hour away in their gated community. I dialed my mother, Arletta. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Every ring felt like a needle to my heart. Finally, the call connected. Before she even spoke, I could hear the ambient sounds of her environment. Soft, classical piano music playing in the background. The distinct, crisp clink of crystal champagne glasses. The low hum of wealthy people murmuring in an exclusive airport lounge. Sutton, what is it? Arletta answered. She let out a long, heavy sigh, the exact sound she always made when she felt I was interrupting her perfect, curated life. Make it quick. Vesper and I are at the VIP lounge. Mom, I choked out, a sob tearing through my chest, aggravating my broken ribs. Mom, please. I have been in a brutal car crash. The truck hit me at 60 miles an hour. I am trapped in the car. They are cutting me out. I am bleeding, and the ambulance is taking me to the trauma center. There was a pause on the line. I waited for the maternal panic. I waited for her to ask if I was dying. I waited for her to tell me she was on her way. Are you sure it is that serious, Sutton? Arletta asked, her tone dripping with profound irritation. You know how you tend to exaggerate these things for attention. Remember when you thought you had appendicitis, and it was just indigestion? I stared at the paramedic, tears streaming down my face mixing with the blood. The paramedic leaned closer, her expression shifting from focused medical concern to utter shock. She could hear every word through the cracked speaker. My car is destroyed, I pleaded, my voice cracking. I cannot breathe. Please, Mom. Romy is at home with Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable cannot handle her. I need you to go to my house right now and pick up Romy. Please, Mom, she is your granddaughter. I heard Vesper's voice in the background, laughing about something. Then, Arletta came back on the line, her voice sharp and entirely devoid of empathy. Stop whining, Sutton, she snapped. Your sister never ruins my plans like this. Vesper and I are boarding our flight for our European getaway in 20 minutes. This trip has been planned for months. We have a private wine tasting tour in Paris tomorrow. I am not missing my flight because you cannot manage your own life. Mom, this is a literal emergency. I might not survive this. I screamed, the effort sending dark spots dancing across my vision. Romy is 6 weeks old. She has no one else. Then call a babysitter, Arletta replied coldly. You are a regional director. You make good money. Fix it yourself. Vesper handles her own messes, why can't you? I am on vacation. Click. The line went dead. The phone slipped from my bloody fingers and fell onto the ruined console. The silence that followed was louder than the sirens. My own mother had just left my newborn infant stranded while I was being rushed to emergency trauma surgery, all because she did not want to miss her first-class flight to Europe. She chose a vacation over my life and my daughter's safety. The paramedic gently took my hand. We are going to get you out of here, honey, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And we will help you figure out the baby. I promise. As the heavy hydraulic jaws clamped onto the metal frame of my car and began to tear the roof away, a profound shift happened inside my mind. The panic faded. The fear evaporated. The physical agony of my crushed leg and punctured lung receded into the background. In their place, a dark, quiet, and terrifyingly cold anger began to bloom. You see, Arletta was not just a heartless mother. She was a hypocrite of the highest order. The very luxury vacation she had just chosen over my newborn daughter was, in reality, funded by my sweat, my stress, and my bank account. For years, I had allowed myself to be the family scapegoat, enduring their insults while secretly playing their financial savior. I had bought into the illusion that if I just gave them enough, if I just kept them comfortable, they would eventually love me. But lying there in the wreckage, tasting my own blood, the illusion shattered. Arletta had just made a fatal miscalculation. She had assumed the scapegoat would always remain submissive. She forgot that the scapegoat was the one holding the keys to her entire kingdom. They loaded me onto the stretcher. The bright sky above me spun dizzily. I did not know if I was going to survive the night in the operating room. But I made a silent vow right then and there. If I wake up from this surgery, I am going to tear her perfect, luxurious world down to the studs. The emergency room was a chaotic, terrifying whirlwind of bright fluorescent lights, shouting medical staff, and the sharp, clinical scent of antiseptic. They rushed me through double doors, immediately starting 4 lines and hooking me up to an array of monitors that beeped in a frantic rhythm. The doctors determined I had a shattered femur, 3 broken ribs, and a punctured lung that was rapidly filling my chest cavity with fluid. They pushed heavy painkillers into my veins, sending my brain into a foggy, detached state to prepare me for the chest tube insertion. As I lay there, staring blankly at the ceiling tiles while they prepped the surgical instruments, my mind drifted away from the sterile hospital room. To protect myself from the impending pain, my brain retreated into the past, walking through the dark, dusty corridors of my own memories. It felt as though I was wandering through a carefully curated museum dedicated entirely to my own humiliation and familial rejection. Growing up in my household, I was the invisible child. Actually, that is not entirely accurate. I was visible when there were chores to be done, when the house needed cleaning, or when blame needed to be assigned for something gone wrong. My younger sister, Vesper, was the unquestioned golden child. Vesper was delicate. Vesper was artistic. Vesper was destined for greatness, even though she had never held a real job in her life. She currently labeled herself a lifestyle blogger, which was essentially a polite cover story for taking aesthetically pleasing photographs in expensive cafes while contributing zero tangible value to society. Vesper required constant coddling and financial support, which Arletta and Orson were always eager to provide. I, on the other hand, was just Sutton, the reliable draft horse expected to pull the heavy cart up the hill without ever asking for water. Exhibit A in my mental museum of pain flashed vividly behind my closed eyes, my college graduation day. I had worked 2 grueling part-time jobs, waitressing until 2 in the morning and tutoring underclassmen, just to pay my own tuition because my parents refused to help. I studied until my eyes bled, determined to build a solid future, and I graduated with top honors. On the morning of the ceremony, I ironed my gown, feeling a rare surge of pride. I had reserved 2 front-row seats for Arletta and Orson. When I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, the auditorium echoed with cheers from other families. I looked down at the second row. The 2 seats I had saved were entirely empty. Later that evening, sitting alone in my cramped apartment in my graduation gown, I called my mother. She answered casually, the sound of a television blaring in the background. When I asked why they did not come, Arletta sighed and said Vesper had gone through a tragic breakup with her boyfriend of 3 months. Vesper was inconsolable, so Arletta had to take her on a spontaneous weekend spa retreat to heal her broken heart. My monumental, life-changing achievement meant less than a teenager's fleeting romantic drama. Exhibit B materialized next, the day I bought my first house. I was 25 years old, exhausted but immensely proud of saving enough money from my demanding corporate job to put down a solid 20% deposit on a beautiful suburban home. I invited my parents over for a celebratory dinner, hoping for just 1 ounce of parental pride. Arletta walked through the front door, her eyes scanning the gleaming hardwood floors and high ceilings. Instead of congratulating me, she scoffed. She turned to my father, Orson, and said loud enough for me to hear, "She must have married into money, because a warehouse manager certainly cannot afford a place like this on her own." I was a regional director of supply chain logistics, managing a multi-million-dollar operation, not a warehouse manager. But she had never bothered to learn my actual job title because my career did not fit her narrative of my mediocrity. And then I reached the crown jewel of the museum. The deepest, most heavily guarded secret of my entire existence. When I was 20 years old, just starting to climb the corporate ladder and making real, substantial money, a crisis hit my family. My father, Orson, was forced into early retirement due to company restructuring. My parents had always lived far beyond their means, treating credit cards like limitless magic wands. Suddenly, they were drowning in insurmountable debt. They were mere weeks away from losing their sprawling, ostentatious house in the exclusive Oakbrook estate to the bank. Their luxury cars were on the verge of being repossessed. I remember walking into their kitchen one evening and finding Arletta sobbing uncontrollably, not because she feared homelessness, but because she was terrified of the social humiliation of losing her upper-class status among her snobby, wealthy friends. Despite years of profound emotional neglect, despite the blatant favoritism, I could not bear to see them lose everything. I still craved their love. So, I did something incredibly naive, incredibly stupid, and undeniably loyal. I hired a financial lawyer. I set up a shell company, a limited liability company, and named it to sound like an obscure corporate pension fund associated with Orson's former industry. Through that anonymous LLC, I set up an ironclad automatic bank transfer. $5,800 every single month for 9 long years. That money, directly from my paycheck, paid their massive mortgage in full. It covered their luxury car leases. It kept the chandeliers burning, the wine fridge stocked with imported vintages, and the designer labels in Arletta's closet. My parents were miraculously saved from financial ruin. They were led to believe that Orson's old company had discovered a legal loophole and paid out a massive, ongoing early retirement settlement. They never questioned it. They never looked too closely at the paperwork. They simply accepted the windfall because greedy, entitled people rarely question where free money comes from as long as it keeps flowing into their pockets. They took my hard-earned money and built a kingdom of lies. Arletta paraded around town acting like old money, looking down on working-class people, looking down on me. She funded Vesper's ridiculous lifestyle blog, paying for her designer handbags and weekend getaways, entirely with the sweat off my back. Let us do the undeniable math. 9 years. 12 months a year. $5,800 a month. $626,400. I had poured over $500,000 of my own wealth into sustaining their fantasy life. I sacrificed luxury vacations with my husband, Hayes. I drove a sensible, safe SUV instead of the dream car I wanted. I worked 60-hour weeks, solving massive corporate crises, losing sleep, just to ensure that automatic transfer went through on the first of every month without fail. And what did that profound, silent sacrifice buy me? What was the return on my massive investment? It bought me a mother who could not be bothered to miss her flight to Paris to rescue her newborn granddaughter while I was bleeding out in a twisted pile of metal on the highway. Okay, Sutton, we are going to insert the tube now. The surgeon's voice broke through my reverie. You are going to feel immense pressure. I nodded, gripping the metal side rails of the hospital bed until my knuckles turned white. As the sharp, agonizing pain flared in my side, a different kind of clarity washed over my mind. The heavy fog of the painkillers lifted just enough for my lifelong sorrow to crystallize into something hard, sharp, and dangerous. I was done being the family ATM. I was done buying affection that never actually existed. The well had just run dry. If you have ever been the silent provider for a toxic family, if you know the crushing weight of buying their approval only to be treated like garbage, smash that like button so I know I am not alone. Because what I did next was going to shatter their fragile reality into a million unrecoverable pieces. When I finally drifted back into consciousness in the surgical recovery room, the relentless, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors was the only thing grounding me to reality. My chest was wrapped tightly in thick bandages, the drainage tube snaking out from my side, and my left leg was encased in a heavy, restrictive cast from hip to ankle. The pain was no longer a sharp stabbing sensation. It had morphed into a dull, throbbing entity that lived deep in my bones. But my mind was remarkably, terrifyingly sharp. The adrenaline of survival had burned away the lingering anesthesia. The first thing I did was weakly press the call button and demand my phone from the attending nurse. I had 47 missed calls. Most of them were from my husband, Hayes. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number. He picked up on the very first ring. Sutton, oh my God, Hayes' voice cracked the moment he answered. He was in an airport terminal, the background noise loud and chaotic, announcements blaring over the intercom. I am boarding the first flight back right now. I canceled the rest of the audit. Are you okay? Where is Romy? Is she safe? Hearing his voice, the strong, steady tone of a man who actually loved me, who prioritized me above all else, broke the dam holding back my emotions. Tears spilled hot and fast down my bruised and battered cheeks. I told him everything. I detailed the horrific crash, the terrifying moments trapped in the car, and the extensive surgery I had just endured. And then, my voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper, I told him about the phone call with Arletta. I repeated her words verbatim. Stop whining. Vesper never ruins my plans. I am on vacation. Hayes went dead silent. My husband was a senior corporate auditor. He lived his entire life in complex spreadsheets, logic puzzles, and calm risk assessments. He was known in his firm for his unflappable demeanor. He rarely, if ever, lost his temper. But when he finally spoke, his voice was a low, terrifying growl that sent shivers down my spine. She left our 6-week-old daughter with a deaf neighbor to go on a luxury trip, he asked, articulating every syllable with lethal precision. Yes, I sobbed quietly into the hospital phone. I will be at the hospital in 4 hours, Hayes said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation or argument. Hang on, baby. We are going to handle this. But I still had an immediate, pressing crisis. Mrs. Gable could not take care of Romy for another 4 hours. With shaking fingers, I pulled up a contact I had saved deep in my phone during my pregnancy for worst-case scenarios. Elite Care Specialists. It was a premium, 24-hour emergency nanny service used by high-net-worth individuals. They charged $90 an hour, a staggeringly steep price, but at that moment, I did not care if they charged $1,000 a minute. I needed my daughter safe, fed, and comforted. I explained my situation to the dispatcher. Within 40 minutes, a woman named Mile arrived directly at my hospital room. She was tall, dressed in crisp, professional scrubs, and radiated a calming, competent energy. She carried a specialized medical cooler containing the breast milk I had managed to pump with the nurse's help right before they wheeled me into surgery. Romy is entirely safe, Mile assured me gently, handing me my phone which now displayed photos of my baby sleeping soundly in her familiar crib. Mile had gone to the house first, taken over the care, relieved a very panicked Mrs. Gable, and then come to the hospital to brief me. She took the bottle perfectly. You have nothing to worry about on that front. I let out a shuddering breath that I felt like I had been holding for hours. Thank you, I whispered, sinking back into the stiff hospital pillows. You have no idea what a nightmare today has been. I was so terrified. Mile offered a warm, empathetic smile. But as she looked at the patient information board on the wall above my bed, and then down at my face, her expression shifted into one of deep, uncomfortable recognition. She shifted her weight nervously. Sutton, she hesitated, her voice dropping lower, ensuring the nurses outside the door could not hear. This is incredibly unprofessional of me, and I usually maintain strict client confidentiality, but I recognized your name from the agency file. And seeing your face in person. I used to work for a family in Oakbrook Estate. The Vanderbilts. Oakbrook Estate. That was the ultra-wealthy, exclusive gated community where my parents lived. Where the massive house stood, funded entirely by my secret monthly payments. I know the area well, I said cautiously, my heart rate beginning to pick up on the monitor. Mile grimaced, clearly warring with her professional ethics before deciding that basic human decency was more important. Your mother is Arletta, isn't she? I used to be the head nanny for the Vanderbilt children. Your mother was over at their estate all the time for their afternoon tea parties and charity planning committees. My stomach plummeted. I could already taste the bitter bile rising in the back of my throat. I knew Arletta was vain, but I never knew what she said about me behind closed doors. What did she say about me? I asked, bracing myself for the impact. Mile looked incredibly apologetic, her eyes filled with genuine pity. Sutton, she used to sit on that extravagant patio, sipping expensive imported wine, and complain endlessly to those women about how embarrassed she was of you. She told everyone in that social circle that you were a massive disappointment. She said you were a lazy freeloader who managed to trap a rich husband, and that all your financial success was just his money. She used to constantly praise your sister Vesper as the true business genius of the family, claiming Vesper's blog was generating millions. The heart monitor beside me picked up its pace, the beeps coming faster and faster. She called me a freeloader? I asked, the word tasting like battery acid on my tongue. She told people I lived off my husband? I am so incredibly sorry, Mile whispered, reaching out to gently touch my uninjured hand. But after seeing you here today, broken in a hospital bed, paying out of pocket for emergency care for your child while she is proudly posting photos from a first-class airport lounge on Instagram, I felt like you needed to know exactly who you are dealing with. She does not respect you, Sutton. I closed my eyes, absorbing the toxic reality of my mother's betrayal. I thanked Mile for her honesty and asked her to return to my house to watch Romy until Hayes finally arrived from the airport. Once the heavy door clicked shut, I was left entirely alone in the quiet, dim room. The physical pain in my shattered leg and chest was entirely eclipsed by a blinding, white-hot rage that burned through my veins like liquid fire. My mother was not just passively taking my money to survive. She was actively using the high-class status my money provided to humiliate me to her high-society friends. She was weaponizing my silent financial support to build a golden pedestal for Vesper and dig a deep, shameful grave for my reputation. I had sacrificed my youth, my peace of mind, and my own financial freedom to protect a woman who fundamentally despised my existence. I reached for the hospital-issued iPad on the bedside table. My fingers were bruised, swollen, and sluggish, but my intent was razor-sharp and deadly focused. It was time to close the Bank of Sutton forever. Are you ready to see a lifelong parasite get violently detached from its host? The harsh blue glow of the iPad screen illuminated the dark, quiet hospital room, casting long shadows against the sterile walls. I logged into my secure banking portal, typing my password with stiff, bruised fingers. I navigated past my personal checking account and the joint savings account I shared with Hayes, heading straight into the hidden corporate accounts. There it was. The LLC. The quiet, invisible, tireless engine that had been pumping lifeblood into my parents' vanity and arrogance for almost a decade. I stared at the scheduled transactions page. The next automatic transfer of $5,800 was queued up in green text, scheduled to process in exactly 3 days, right on the 1st of the month. It was aimed directly at Orson and Arletta's massive mortgage lender and the luxury car leasing company that provided their twin Mercedes SUVs. For 9 long years, I had never once touched the screen. I had set it up in my early 20s and forced myself to forget about it, treating it like a necessary, painful tax required to maintain familial peace. But there was no peace. There was only exploitation, mockery, and abandonment. With a single, deliberate tap of my index finger, I hit the button labeled Cancel Recurring Transfer. A secondary confirmation box popped up on the screen in bright red lettering, warning me that canceling this action would permanently stop all future payments associated with this contract. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I hit confirm. Just like that, the financial foredrip was violently ripped out of their arms. I sat there in the hospital bed watching the screen refresh, waiting to feel a wave of guilt or regret. I waited to feel like a bad, ungrateful daughter. But all I felt was an overwhelming, euphoric sense of absolute liberation. The heavy iron chain that had been wrapped around my neck for 9 years had just shattered into dust. But I was not quite done. The money that used to flow to them needed a new, purposeful home. I opened a new high-yield investment account right there from the hospital bed. I titled it, Romy's Future. I set up the exact same automatic transfer. $5,800 every single month would now go directly toward my daughter's college fund, her first house, her future security. My hard-earned money was finally going to someone who actually deserved it. Just as I closed the banking application and set the iPad down, my phone buzzed violently on the bedside table. It was Hayes. He had just landed at the local airport and was in an Uber heading toward our house to relieve Mile before coming straight to the hospital. I did it, I told him the second I answered the phone, my voice steady and resolute. I cut them off, Hayes. The LLC transfer is permanently canceled. They're on their own. Good, Hayes said, his voice unusually rigid and devoid of its usual warmth. I could hear the hum of highway traffic through the phone speaker. Burn it all down, Sutton. Leave nothing standing. But you need to brace yourself, because I just found something else. Something that is going to make your blood boil hotter than it already is. What is it? I asked, shifting uncomfortably in the bed, a fresh spike of pain flaring in my broken ribs. What else could they possibly have done? While I was on the plane, I paid for the in-flight Wi-Fi so I could pull up the security camera feeds for our house to check on Mile and Romy, Hayes explained, his tone dangerously calm, the tone of an auditor who has just found massive corporate fraud. I scrubbed back through the footage from earlier today, right around the time of your accident. Sutton, Vesper was in our house today. My breath caught in my throat. Vesper? Why would Vesper be at our house? Arletta said they were at the airport. She told Mrs. Gable she came by to drop off a small gift for Romy before her trip to Europe, Hayes said, the disgust evident in his voice. But she didn't stay in the nursery with the baby. The hallway camera caught her sneaking into my home office while Mrs. Gable was distracted in the kitchen. She was in the office for 4 minutes. When she came out, she was stuffing a thick white envelope into her designer handbag. The emergency cash, I whispered, a cold sweat breaking out across the back of my neck. Hayes and I always kept an envelope with $2,000 in small bills tucked inside a hollowed-out book on his bookshelf. It was our rainy day safety net, meant for natural disasters or banking outages. We had never told anyone about it, but Vesper had always been nosy, always snooping through our things when she visited. She robbed us, Hayes stated flatly, leaving no room for doubt. Your sister used the chaos of your accident to walk into our home, pretend to care about our newborn daughter, and steal $2,000 in cash to fund her European vacation shopping. The sheer audacity was so staggering it took my breath away. Vesper had stolen from me. Arletta had abandoned my child to die in a wrecked car. They were not just toxic family members with bad attitudes. They were active, malicious predators feeding off my family's stability and wealth. Download the footage, I instructed Hayes, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like a living physical entity inside the hospital room. Save it to multiple hard drives. Do not let it get deleted. Already done, Hayes replied. I am pulling up to the house now. I will kiss Romy, thank Mael, and be at the hospital in 30 minutes. We are going to destroy them. When Hayes hung up, I did not cry. Crying was an activity for victims, and I was officially done being a victim. I pulled up another contact on my phone. Merrick. He was Hayes' best friend from college and one of the most ruthless, expensive financial lawyers in the state. It was late, almost 9 at night, but Merrick picked up on the second ring. Sutton? Are you all right? Hayes texted me about the crash, Merrick said, genuine concern evident in his voice. I am alive, I croaked out, my throat dry and scratchy. But I need a favor, Merrick. A massive, off-the-books favor right now. Tonight. Name it. Anything. I need you to pull every single public and private property record, lien, and deed attached to my parents' house in Oakbrook Estate. I need to know the exact financial standing of Orson and Arletta. I want to know if they owe money to anyone else, what their credit score looks like, and exactly what happens to that property the second their massive mortgage defaults next month. Merrick let out a low, impressed whistle. Going straight for the jugular, huh? I love it. I will run a deep background financial sweep right now. I can be at your hospital room first thing in the morning with the physical files. Thank you, Merrick, I said, ending the call. I lay back in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across the hospital ceiling. My mother and sister were currently soaring across the Atlantic Ocean, sipping free champagne in first class, blissfully unaware that the solid ground beneath their luxurious lives had just been completely demolished. Their European getaway was going to be the last peaceful sleep they ever had. Because tomorrow, the storm was coming, and it was going to wash them away. The morning sun hit the hospital blinds, casting harsh, bright lines of light across my bed and waking me from a fitful, drug-induced slumber. I had barely slept, fueled by a potent mixture of heavy painkillers and pure, unadulterated vengeance. Hayes was asleep in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to me, his tall frame awkwardly contorted, his hand resting gently on my uninjured arm. He looked exhausted, the immense stress of the last 24 hours etched deeply into the lines around his eyes. At exactly 8 in the morning, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the room. The door swung open and Merrick walked in. He was wearing a meticulously tailored suit, carrying a thick manila folder under his arm, and holding 2 steaming cups of black coffee from the premium cafe downstairs. He handed one to Hayes, who blinked awake and rubbed his face, and then Merrick pulled up a rolling stool right next to my bed. You look like you went 12 rounds with a runaway freight train, Sutton, Merrick said with a sympathetic grimace, eyeing the chest tube and the massive leg cast. I feel exactly like it, too, I rasped, my throat still raw. Tell me you brought good news. Tell me I can ruin them. Merrick placed the thick manila folder on my rolling tray table and flipped it open. The pages were dense with complex legal jargon, highlighted numbers, and bank seals. I stayed up half the night pulling these records, digging through every financial crevice of their lives, he began, tapping an expensive pen against the paper. The LLC you set up has been cleanly, flawlessly paying their mortgage for 9 years. Because they never contributed a dime of their own money, they have zero actual equity built up on their own merit. But Sutton, things are much, much worse than just them living off your dime. Worse how? Hayes asked, sitting up straight, his auditor instincts immediately kicking in, his eyes scanning the documents. Merrick pulled out a specific, flagged document, stamped with a prominent bank seal dated exactly 6 months ago. Your mother, Arletta, attempted to take out a secondary home equity line of credit. She tried to borrow $100,000 against the house. I stared at the paper, my mind racing to comprehend the sheer greed. Why would she need $100,000 in cash? My LLC covered all their living expenses. They lacked nothing. According to the business filings I dug up, Merrick explained, pointing to a highlighted paragraph, Arletta was trying to secure that massive cash injection to open a boutique digital media company for Vesper. A vanity LLC so Vesper could call herself a CEO and pretend her lifestyle blog was a legitimate corporate enterprise. But here is the truly criminal part, Sutton. Arletta forged your father Orson's signature on the loan application. The silence in the hospital room was deafening. Arletta had committed blatant, documented felony bank fraud just to fund Vesper's delusions of grandeur. Did the loan go through? I asked, my heart pounding aggressively against my broken ribs, sending spikes of pain through my torso. If it did, and the house defaults next month because I cut the payments, the legal fallout could be incredibly messy. They could try to drag me into it. No, Merrick smirked, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied expression. The bank flagged the signature discrepancy during the underwriting process and flatly denied the loan. But it proves undeniable malicious intent. It proves she is reckless, desperate, and willing to commit federal fraud. But wait, Sutton. It gets even better. He flipped to the very last page in the thick folder. It was a faded, yellowed copy of the original mortgage agreement from decades ago, long before I ever started paying for it. I noticed a second signature line under Orson's name. When your parents bought that extravagant house, their credit was absolute garbage, Merrick said, tapping the second signature line. They needed a cosigner. A guarantor with sterling credit and substantial assets to secure the massive loan. Do you know who is legally tied to that property? Do you know whose neck is on the chopping block? I squinted at the cursive script, trying to make out the faded name. When I finally read it, my breath hitched in my throat. Gideon. My grandfather. My mother's father was a retired military man. He was rigid, highly principled, and fiercely fair. He was the only person in my entire extended family who had ever treated me with genuine respect and kindness. He had quietly slipped me cash for college textbooks when my parents refused to help. He had always been deeply suspicious of Arletta's lavish spending, but she had constantly lied to his face, claiming Orson was a genius stock investor. If their mortgage defaults next month because you cut the LLC payments, Merrick explained slowly, ensuring I grasped the gravity of the situation, the bank will not just foreclose on Arletta and Orson. They will immediately go after Grandpa Gideon to collect the outstanding debt. His retirement savings, his own house, his pension, everything he owns will be on the line because of their financial irresponsibility. Panic seized my chest, tight and unforgiving. No, I gasped, looking at Hayes. I cannot let them ruin Grandpa. He is 75 years old. He cannot handle a massive financial hit like that. We have to warn him. Before Merrick could offer a legal solution, the hospital room door swung open again. I expected a nurse coming to check my vitals or change my bandages. Instead, the man standing in the doorway made the air in the room drop 10 degrees instantly. It was Grandpa Gideon. He stood incredibly tall despite his age, leaning heavily on a polished oak cane. His sharp, piercing blue eyes swept over the room, taking in my bruised face, the terrifying chest tube, the massive leg cast, and then settling on Hayes and Merrick. He looked furious. Not just angry, but possessed by a cold, calculated wrath. "I got a call from Mrs. Gable this morning," Grandpa Gideon said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that demanded absolute silence and attention from everyone in the room. "She told me you were nearly killed in a wreck. She also told me she heard you begging my daughter Arletta for help on the phone, and that Arletta abandoned you to go on a vacation." I swallowed hard, tears welling in my eyes at the sight of him. "Grandpa, I am so sorry. I didn't want to drag you into this mess." "Do not apologize to me, Sutton," he interrupted, stepping further into the room, his heavy cane thumping rhythmically against the linoleum floor. "I raised a selfish, narcissistic fool, and I have spent years watching her tear you down to build Vesper up. I am done playing the blind, passive old man." Grandpa Gideon walked over to the tray table and looked down at the legal documents Merrick had spread out. He saw his own signature on the old mortgage guarantor line. He looked at Merrick, then at Hayes, and finally at me. "What is this?" he demanded, pointing a weathered finger at the LLC paperwork. It was time. I could not protect them anymore. With Hayes firmly holding my hand, I laid out the entire, ugly 9-year lie. I told him about the secret LLC. I told him about the $5,800 a month. I told him about the staggering total sum of $626,400. And finally, I let Merrick explain Arletta's desperate attempt at loan fraud. Grandpa Gideon did not yell. He did not throw a tantrum. Instead, an eerie, terrifying calm washed over his weathered face. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and looked at me with eyes as cold as a winter storm. "Sutton," he said softly, the quiet tone far more intimidating than a scream. "They think they're on top of the world right now in Paris. But by the time I am done making phone calls today, they will not have a pot to piss in. If you are loving this story and want to see Grandpa Gideon drop the hammer on this toxic family, take just a second to hit that like button and drop a comment saying, 'I'm Win.' That is our secret code to let me know you have made it this far, and I will be hearting and replying to every single comment with that keyword." The silence that followed my confession was heavy, suffocating, and charged with an electric tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. I watched Grandpa Gideon carefully. I expected a man of his advanced age to perhaps collapse under the weight of such a massive betrayal, or at least show signs of physical weakness. But the military discipline that had defined his youth seemed to surge back into his veins. His posture straightened. His grip on the carved head of his oak cane tightened until his knuckles turned a stark, bony white. He did not look like a fragile elderly man. He looked like a commanding officer about to issue a court-martial. He stared down at the documents Merrick had spread across the tray table. He traced the forged signature of my father, Orson, and then let his eyes linger on his own signature on the original guarantor line. When he finally looked back up at me, his blue eyes were stripped of any grandfatherly warmth. They were the eyes of a man who realized he had been played for a fool by his own flesh and blood. "Sutton," Grandpa Gideon began, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register that forced everyone in the room to lean in. "You mean to tell me that for the last 9 years, you have been funding their entire existence? The luxury cars, the country club memberships, the endless home renovations." "Yes, Grandpa," I whispered, the exhaustion of my surgery catching up to me, making my voice tremble. "Every single month. $5,800. I thought I was saving them from ruin. I thought if I just took care of the massive burden, they would eventually have the emotional capacity to act like real parents. And instead of gratitude, my daughter treated you like a disposable servant," he stated, not asking a question, but stating a grim, undeniable fact. He turned toward the window, looking out over the hospital parking lot, his jaw muscles working furiously as he ground his teeth together. "I did not know the extent of her cruelty until today," I admitted, tears pricking the corners of my eyes again. I did not know she was using the status my money provided to mock me to her wealthy friends. I did not know she would leave Romy stranded while I was bleeding in a crushed car. I just wanted them to love me, Grandpa. Grandpa Gideon closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting out a long, ragged sigh that carried decades of disappointment. When he opened them, the sorrow was gone, replaced entirely by a cold, calculating fury. "Where is Orson?" Grandpa Gideon demanded suddenly, pivoting back to face me and Hayes. "If Arletta is on a flight to Paris, why is Orson not sitting in that chair right there, holding his injured daughter's hand?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a hesitant glance with Merrick before answering. "Orson is not here, sir. Sutton's mother said she and Vesper were boarding the flight for a European getaway. They left him at home." The reaction from Grandpa Gideon was instantaneous and terrifying. His face drained of color, turning a pale, sickly shade of gray before flushing with violent red anger. He took a step back, hitting the edge of the visitor chair, and had to lean heavily on his cane to steady himself. "Vesper," Grandpa Gideon repeated, the name sounding like a curse word in his mouth. "She took Vesper to Paris?" "Yes," I answered, confused by his intense reaction. "Arletta said they had a private wine tasting tour planned. It was a mother-daughter trip." "Why? Does it matter?" "It matters," Grandpa Gideon growled, his voice vibrating with a rage so profound it seemed to shake the sterile hospital walls. "It matters because I am the one who paid for that European trip." Hayes gasped softly, and even Merrick, a seasoned lawyer who had seen every flavor of human depravity, raised his eyebrows in genuine shock. "What do you mean you paid for it?" I asked, my heart sinking into my stomach as another layer of their deception peeled away. 3 months ago, Grandpa Gideon explained, pacing the small space between my bed and the door, his cane striking the floor in a steady, rhythmic beat. "Arletta came to my house crying. She told me that she and Orson were going through a terrible rough patch in their marriage. She claimed they were on the brink of divorce because Orson was so stressed about his investments. She said they desperately needed a romantic getaway to reconnect, to save their 30-year marriage. But she claimed all their cash was tied up in non-liquid assets, and they could not afford the trip she had carefully planned." He stopped pacing and looked directly at me, the shame of being conned burning bright in his eyes. "I wanted to save my daughter's marriage," he continued, his voice tight. "So I wrote her a check. $15,000. I paid for 2 first-class tickets to Paris, a week in a luxury hotel overlooking the Eiffel Tower, and exclusive dining packages. It was an anniversary gift. A gift meant strictly for her and Orson." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Arletta had never intended to take Orson. She had manipulated her elderly father, preying on his desire for family unity, just to extract $15,000 in raw cash. She then took that money, dumped her husband, and brought her spoiled golden child on a luxury European vacation, leaving me to bleed out in a wrecked car. "She lied to you," Hayes said, summarizing the ugly truth. "She manipulated you to fund a joyride for Vesper." "She did more than lie," Grandpa Gideon said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "She committed financial theft against her own father. Just like she committed identity theft against her husband by forging that loan document. Just like she has been committing emotional theft against you, Sutton, for 9 long years." He walked over to my bedside and reached out, gently placing his large, calloused hand over my uninjured arm. The contrast between his harsh words and his gentle touch made a fresh wave of tears spill down my cheeks. "You have carried this heavy burden for far too long, my brave girl," Grandpa Gideon said softly. "You try to be the savior of a family that only wanted to drown you. But your shift is over. I am taking the wheel now. And I promise you, by the time the sun sets today, Arletta will wish she had never boarded that plane." He pulled his flip phone from his pocket, flipped it open with a sharp snap, and dialed a number from his memory. He did not step out into the hallway. He wanted us to hear every single word. The retribution was officially beginning. The hospital room was dead silent, save for the rhythmic humming of the medical machinery and the faint, tinny sound of the international dialing tone echoing from Grandpa Gideon's phone. He had put the device on speaker, placing it carefully on the edge of my tray table so that Hayes, Merrick, and I could hear everything. It was mid-afternoon in our time zone, which meant it was late evening in Paris. Arletta and Vesper had likely just settled into their extravagant $15,000 suite. The phone rang 4 times. Finally, there was a click, followed by the sound of a cork popping and Vesper's obnoxious, high-pitched laughter in the background. "Hello," Arletta answered. Her voice was thick with expensive wine and unearned arrogance. "Dad? It is late here. We just opened a bottle of vintage Bordeaux. The view of the Eiffel Tower is simply stunning. Orson and I are having the most magical time." She was still lying. She was standing in Paris with Vesper, yet she had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to look at the Eiffel Tower and lie directly to the father who had paid for her to be there. I felt a surge of nausea that had nothing to do with my injuries. Grandpa Gideon did not raise his voice. He did not scream. He used a tone of voice I had only ever heard him use when he was talking about his time in the military, a tone reserved for traitors and cowards. "Cut the garbage, Arletta," he said. "I know Orson is not with you. I know you brought Vesper. I know you took my $15,000 and used it to fund a joyride with your spoiled brat of a daughter." There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. The sound of Vesper laughing abruptly stopped. The silence that stretched across the transatlantic connection was heavy with sudden, crushing panic. "Dad, I can explain," Arletta stammered, her elegant facade cracking instantly. "Orson could not get away from his investments, and the tickets were non-refundable. I did not want your generous gift to go to waste, so I brought Vesper. We were going to tell you." "Shut your mouth," Grandpa Gideon snapped, the command cracking like a physical whip in the hospital room. "You will not speak. You will listen. I know everything, Arletta. I know about the forged signature on the home equity loan. I know you tried to steal $100,000 using my credit as collateral." "What?" "No, Dad, that is a misunderstanding. I said, shut your mouth," he roared, finally letting a fraction of his fury break the surface. "And more importantly, I know about Sutton. I know about the LLC. I know about the $5,800 she has been secretly funneling into your bank account every single month for the last 9 years to keep a roof over your ungrateful head." The silence from Paris was profound. I could almost picture the blood draining from Arletta's heavily Botoxed face. She had been caught. The intricate web of lies she had spent a decade spinning had just been set on fire. "Dad, who told you these things?" Arletta demanded, her voice shifting from panic to defensive anger. "Is it Sutton? Is she making up stories again? You know how dramatic she is. She just got into a minor fender bender today and was acting like the world was ending, trying to ruin my trip." I squeezed my eyes shut, fresh tears of frustration burning my cheeks. Even now, backed into a corner, her first instinct was to throw me under the bus. "A minor fender bender?" Grandpa Gideon repeated, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. "She has a shattered femur. She has 3 broken ribs. She has a punctured lung with a tube draining fluid from her chest. She almost died, Arletta. And while she was bleeding, trapped in crushed metal, she begged you to make sure her newborn daughter was safe. And you told her to stop whining." I did not know it was that bad," Arletta faltered, the first genuine note of fear creeping into her voice. "She always exaggerates." "Here is what is going to happen," Grandpa Gideon interrupted, ignoring her pathetic excuses. "Sutton has officially canceled the LLC transfers. The Bank of Sutton is permanently closed. Which means next month, your massive mortgage will bounce. Your luxury car leases will bounce. You have exactly 24 hours to fix this." "Fix this? How am I supposed to fix this from Paris?" Arletta cried, her voice pitching into genuine hysteria. "Dad, you have to help us. We will lose the house." "You have 24 hours, Grandpa Gideon continued, utterly unmoved by her tears. "You will march down to the airline counter. You will buy 2 economy tickets back to the States using whatever credit you have left. You will walk into this hospital room, you will get on your knees, and you will beg Sutton for forgiveness. You will apologize for abandoning your granddaughter. You will apologize for being a parasite. If you do not do this within exactly 24 hours, I will call my estate lawyer. I will remove you from my will entirely, and I will leave every single asset I own to Sutton and Romy. And when the bank comes to foreclose on your house next month, I will not lift a single finger to save you. Dad, you cannot do this. Arletta shrieked. You cannot leave us with nothing. Vesper needs her future secured. Your 24 hours started 1 minute ago, Grandpa Gideon said coldly. Tick-tock, Arletta. He reached forward and ended the call, cutting off her frantic screaming. He leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. He looked at me, his eyes softening just a fraction. I am sorry I raised a monster, Sutton. But the monster is about to be starved. If you think Arletta deserves to lose everything after what she did, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And remember, if you have watched this far, drop a comment saying, I'm Win, so I can heart it and reply to you. Now, get ready, because what happened when the 24 hours expired was the most satisfying destruction I have ever witnessed. The 24-hour countdown felt like a slow, agonizing crawl through thick mud. I spent the night drifting in and out of a restless, pain-filled sleep, waking up every few hours as the nurses came in to check my chest drainage tube and administer more medication. Hayes refused to leave my side, sleeping in the terrible plastic chair, holding my hand even while unconscious. Deep down, a naive, battered part of my inner child hoped Arletta would actually show up. I hoped the threat of losing her inheritance and her precious house would be enough to force her onto a plane, force her to walk into my room, and force her to finally acknowledge my pain. But as the clock ticked past noon the next day, and then past 3 in the afternoon, my phone remained entirely silent. No frantic apologies. No flight itineraries forwarded to my email. No signs of remorse. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, my phone vibrated on the tray table. It was not a call from Arletta. It was a notification from the extended family group chat. The chat included my parents, Vesper, Grandpa Gideon, myself, and Aunt Bryony, Arletta's younger sister, who was essentially Arletta's loyal flying monkey, always echoing my mother's toxic opinions. I picked up the phone. Vesper had sent a long, blistering text message to the entire group. Vesper, Sutton, you're a vicious, jealous sociopath. Mom is having a literal panic attack in the hotel room because of the lies you told Grandpa. You ruined our entire trip because you are desperate for attention. You got into a tiny accident and now you are weaponizing Grandpa's money to blackmail us. You have always hated seeing me happy. You are dead to me. Immediately beneath it, Aunt Bryony chimed in. Bryony, Sutton, I am appalled. Your mother does everything for this family, and you pull a stunt like this while she is trying to enjoy a well-deserved vacation? You need intense psychiatric help. Apologize to your mother immediately. I stared at the screen. The sheer delusion was breathtaking. They were doubling down. Instead of apologizing, they were trying to control the narrative, painting me as the unstable aggressor to turn the extended family against me. I showed the messages to Hayes. He let out a harsh bark of laughter that held zero humor. They really want to play this game, he asked, opening his laptop on the tray table. Then let us play. What are you doing? I asked, watching his fingers fly across the keyboard. I am assembling the nuclear warhead, Hayes replied grimly. Merrick sent over the digital copies of the LLC financial records this morning. And I have the security footage of Vesper robbing our house. I looked at the group chat. I looked at the decades of emotional abuse condensed into those 2 vicious text messages. And then I made a choice. I was not going to hide in the shadows anymore. I was going to drag their filthy secrets directly into the blinding light of day. I typed a message into the group chat. Sutton, since Vesper wants to talk about who ruins lives and who weaponizes money, let us look at the actual facts. Everyone please review the attached documents. I hit send. Then, under Hayes' guidance, I uploaded a massive PDF file directly into the family chat. The file contained the official banking ledgers for the secret LLC, clearly showing my name as the sole funder. It highlighted the $5,800 transfers made every single month for 9 years. It included a summary page that calculated the total, $626,400. A minute later, before anyone could formulate a response to the financial bombshell, I uploaded the second file. It was the crisp, high-definition video from my home security camera. The thumbnail clearly showed Vesper's face. When played, the video showed her sneaking into my home office, looking over her shoulder and violently stuffing the thick envelope of emergency cash into her designer bag before fleeing the house. I added one final text. Sutton, my tiny accident resulted in a shattered femur, a punctured lung, and trauma surgery. While I was bleeding, Mom refused to rescue my newborn daughter because she wanted to drink wine in Paris. And while I was in the ambulance, Vesper was busy robbing my house of $2,000 in emergency cash. The LLC payments are permanently canceled. Good luck paying the mortgage next month. Do not ever contact me again. I threw the phone onto the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. For 5 minutes, the group chat was dead silent. I could almost hear the sound of Aunt Bryony's brain short-circuiting as she tried to process the irrefutable evidence. Then, the chat exploded. Bryony, what is this? Sutton, is this real? You paid their mortgage? Vesper, did you steal from your sister's house? Bryony, Arletta, answer me right now. Did you forge these documents? Vesper borrowed $5,000 from me last month claiming she needed it for her blog and that Sutton was refusing to pay her salary. What is going on? Vesper had been scamming Aunt Bryony too. The house of cards was collapsing in real time, the fire spreading to consume every lie they had ever told. Grandpa Gideon, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the hospital room watching this digital massacre unfold, simply nodded his head in grim satisfaction. He stood up, leaning heavily on his cane, and pulled out his flip phone once more. "The 24 hours are up," he announced softly. No apology was issued. They chose war. He dialed a number. "Yes, this is Gideon Vanderbilt. I need to speak to the booking agent for the luxury European package I purchased." "Yes, I am the primary cardholder." He paused, listening to the agent on the other line. "I need to make an immediate cancellation," Grandpa Gideon instructed, his voice devoid of any mercy. "I want you to cancel the return flight tickets for Arletta and Vesper." "Yes, cancel them entirely." "No, do not issue a credit to their names. Furthermore, I want you to contact the hotel in Paris. Cancel the remainder of their reservation effective immediately. Inform the front desk that the card on file is no longer authorized for any incidental charges, room service, or extended stays. They are on their own." He hung up the phone. With one phone call, Grandpa Gideon had stranded my mother and sister thousands of miles from home, stripping them of their luxury accommodations and their guaranteed passage back. They had no significant cash of their own, only high-interest credit cards that were already nearing their limits. The media massacre was complete, and the financial lifeline had been brutally severed. But the fallout was only just beginning because the biggest coward in the family had yet to face the music. The following morning, the atmosphere in my hospital room was a strange mixture of profound relief and lingering anxiety. The heavy burden of the secret LLC had been lifted, but the reality of my physical injuries remained a stark, painful reminder of the trauma. I was undergoing my first round of brutal physical therapy, trying to bend my uninjured knee, when a frantic commotion erupted in the hallway outside my door. "You cannot go in there, sir. She is resting," a nurse shouted. "I am her father. Get out of my way." The door burst open, slamming against the wall. Orson stood in the doorway, panting heavily, his hair disheveled and his usually perfectly pressed polo shirt wrinkled and stained with sweat. He looked nothing like the arrogant, wealthy retiree who spent his days polishing his leased Mercedes and boasting about his golf handicap. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn to the ground. Hayes immediately stood up from his chair, placing himself firmly between Orson and my hospital bed. "Take one more step toward her, Orson, and I will have hospital security drag you out in handcuffs," Hayes warned, his voice low and incredibly dangerous. Orson stopped, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Hayes, please. I just need to talk to my daughter. Sutton, please. You have to listen to me. I am listening, I said coldly, gripping the edge of my blanket. Speak fast, before I press the call button. Orson looked at my heavily bandaged chest, the tube snaking out of my side, and the massive cast on my leg. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw genuine paternal guilt flash across his face. But then he opened his mouth, and the illusion vanished. Sutton, you cannot do this, Orson pleaded, his voice trembling with desperation. I just got off the phone with Arletta. She is hysterical. The hotel in Paris locked them out of their suite. The airline canceled their return tickets. They're stranded. And the bank just sent an automated notice that the LLC transfer was revoked. The mortgage payment is due in 5 days, Sutton. We do not have the cash. Then you better start packing boxes, I replied, my voice steady despite the pain radiating through my ribs. Because the LLC is dead, Orson. I am done paying for your life. Orson fell to his knees, right there on the sterile hospital floor. It was a pathetic sight, a grown man, a father, begging his severely injured daughter to continue funding his unearned luxury. Sutton, please. You know I cannot go back to work. I am too old. We will lose everything. Your mother is a difficult woman, I know she is, but you cannot punish me for her mistakes. I didn't know she was going to abandon you during the crash. If I had been home, I would have gone to get Romy. He was trying to play the victim. He was trying to separate himself from Arletta's cruelty, painting himself as the innocent, ignorant bystander who was just caught in the crossfire. But Hayes was an auditor. He dealt with liars for a living. Hayes reached over to the tray table, picked up the manila folder Merrick had provided, and pulled out a specific document. He walked over to where Orson was kneeling and tossed the paper onto the floor in front of him. Save the innocent act, Orson, Hayes sneered. We know about the home equity loan application. The one Arletta forged your signature on. Orson looked down at the paper, his face turning a sickly shade of chalk white. I did not sign that. She did that behind my back. We know she forged it, I interrupted, staring down at him with utter disgust. But here is the real question, Orson. When the bank denied that loan 6 months ago, they would have sent a formal rejection letter to the house. Addressed to both of you. You handle the mail. You saw that letter. Orson remained frozen, his eyes glued to the floor. If you saw a rejection letter for a loan you never applied for, a normal person would panic, I continued, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together in my mind with terrifying clarity. A normal person would investigate. You would have looked into the equity of the house. And if you looked into the equity, you would have seen the payment history. You would have seen the LLC. The silence in the room was suffocating. You knew, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You knew the whole time. You knew the pension story was a lie. You knew I was the one paying for your house, your cars, your entire life. Orson slowly lifted his head. Tears were streaming down his face, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of a coward who had finally been trapped. I figured it out 3 years ago, Orson confessed, his voice barely a squeak. I found a piece of mail from the LLC's registered agent. I traced it back to your lawyer. And you said nothing? Hayes shouted, losing his famously calm composure. You watched your wife verbally abuse your daughter, treat her like garbage, call her a freeloader, and you knew she was the only reason you weren't living in a cardboard box? And you said nothing. What was I supposed to do? Orson cried, shifting the blame entirely. If I confronted Arletta, she would have thrown a massive fit. She would have divorced me. And if I told Sutton I knew, I was terrified she would stop paying. I just wanted peace in my house. I just wanted to enjoy my retirement. I am an old man. The sheer, staggering cowardice of his admission took my breath away. He was worse than Arletta. Arletta was maliciously cruel, but Orson was a parasite who actively chose to watch me be emotionally tortured just so he could avoid an uncomfortable conversation and keep his free ride. He sold his daughter for a leased Mercedes and a quiet afternoon on the golf course. Your silence was far more violent than her insults, I said, my voice dropping to a dead, hollow monotone. You are not a father. You are a leech. And you have bled me dry for the absolute last time. Sutton, please. Get out, I commanded, pointing a shaking finger at the door. Get out of my room. Get out of my life. And do not ever, for the rest of your miserable existence, call yourself my father again. You have 5 days to figure out your mortgage. Start packing. Hayes grabbed Orson by the collar of his expensive polo shirt, hauled him to his feet, and shoved him roughly out into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind him. The power shift was complete. I was no longer the invisible, desperate child seeking their approval. I was the executioner of their false kingdom, and the blade had just fallen. It took Arletta and Vesper 3 agonizing days to secure passage back to the United States. According to angry texts forwarded to me by Aunt Bryony, who had completely turned against them after discovering Vesper's financial scams. They had to max out 3 different high-interest credit cards just to buy economy seats on a budget airline with 3 layovers. They spent 2 nights sleeping on the hard chairs of Charles de Gaulle Airport because they could not afford a new hotel room. I did not feel an ounce of pity. Every time my chest ached, every time I looked at the photos of my newborn daughter that I could not physically hold, any lingering sympathy evaporated. A week after the accident, I was finally discharged from the hospital. I was transported home via a specialized medical transport van, bound to a wheelchair, my body broken, but my spirit forged in iron. The moment I wheeled through the front door of my house, Romy was placed into my arms. I buried my face in her soft, sweet-smelling hair and cried tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. I was alive. I was home. But the business of vengeance was not quite finished. The first of the month arrived, and exactly as promised, the automated transfer from my LLC did not trigger. 3 days later, Orson and Arletta received their first notice of default from the mortgage lender. I was sitting in my living room, nursing Romy, when Merrick, my lawyer, arrived at my house. He was accompanied by Grandpa Gideon, who looked more resolute and formidable than ever. "They're out of options, Sutton," Merrick announced, spreading a stack of legal documents across my coffee table. Orson tried to apply for emergency personal loans to cover the mortgage, but his credit is tapped out. Arletta tried to beg her wealthy friends in Oakbrook Estate for a bailout, but Aunt Bryony already spread the truth about their financial fraud. They are social pariahs. "So, what happens now?" I asked, carefully adjusting Romy in my arms. "The bank forecloses, they get evicted, and it's over?" "Not quite," Grandpa Gideon spoke up, his voice heavy with grim determination. "If the bank forecloses, they will come after me as the guarantor. They will attach liens to my pension and my property. I will not allow my legacy to be destroyed by their incompetence. So, we force a different outcome," Merrick explained, pointing to a specific, heavily drafted contract on the table. "I have drafted a deed in lieu of foreclosure, combined with a quitclaim deed. Essentially, Orson and Arletta have 2 choices. Choice 1. They default, the bank destroys their credit permanently, they face potential fraud charges for the loan application, and Grandpa Gideon sues them into oblivion for damages." "And choice 2? I asked. "Choice 2, Merrick smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. "They sign this document. They voluntarily surrender all equity and ownership of the Oakbrook Estate property directly to you, Sutton. You take over the deed. In exchange, Grandpa Gideon agrees not to sue them, and you agree to sell the house to recoup the $626,000 you invested in it over the last 9 years. Once the house is sold, the mortgage is cleared, Grandpa Gideon is released as the guarantor, and whatever is left over, which will be nothing, goes to them." "They will be homeless," I stated. It was a fact, not a lament. "They will have to rent a small apartment and get real jobs, just like the rest of the working world," Grandpa Gideon corrected me. "It is called reality, Sutton. And it is about time they met it." The meeting was set for the following morning at Merrick's downtown law office. I insisted on being there. Hayes wheeled me into the massive glass conference room. Grandpa Gideon sat at the head of the table, looking like a judge ready to pass a sentence. When Arletta, Orson, and Vesper walked into the room, I almost did not recognize them. The European vacation and the subsequent stress had aged Arletta 10 years in a single week. Her designer clothes looked disheveled. Her roots were showing. The arrogant, untouchable aura she usually projected was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic, hollow desperation. Orson looked completely defeated, his shoulders slumped, unable to make eye contact with anyone. Vesper just looked furious, glaring at me as if I was the villain in her twisted narrative. They sat down on the opposite side of the sprawling mahogany table. Merrick did not offer them coffee. He did not engage in small talk. He simply slid the massive stack of legal documents across the polished wood. These documents transfer full ownership of the property to Sutton, Merrick stated clearly, his tone devoid of any warmth. You will vacate the premises within 14 days. You will not remove any fixtures or appliances. If you refuse to sign, the bank forecloses on Friday and Gideon files a massive civil lawsuit against both of you on Monday. Sign the papers. Arletta stared at the contract, her hands trembling violently. She looked at me, tears spilling over her mascara-stained cheeks. Sutton, please, she begged, her voice cracking. It is our home. It is where you grew up. You cannot put your own mother out on the street. I am sorry about the phone call. I panicked. I made a mistake. You did not panic, Mom, I replied, my voice steady, echoing in the quiet conference room. You made a calculated choice. You chose a wine tour over my life and my daughter's safety. You chose to call me a freeloader to your friends while secretly surviving on my paycheck. You made your choices for 9 years. Now you get to experience the consequences. This is illegal. Vesper suddenly shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. You are stealing our house. You are blackmailing us. I am going to call the police. Grandpa Gideon slammed his cane onto the table with a deafening crack that made everyone jump. Call them. Grandpa Gideon roared, pointing his cane directly at Vesper. Call the police right now, you spoiled, thieving brat. Let us show them the security footage of you robbing Sutton's house while she was in emergency surgery. Let us show them the forged loan documents your mother signed. Go ahead, dial the numbers. Vesper shrank back into her chair, her face draining of color, utterly silenced. Orson let out a broken sob, picked up the pen, and signed his name on the designated line. He pushed the document toward Arletta. She looked at the signature, realizing it was truly over. The kingdom was lost. With a shaking hand, she signed her name, legally surrendering the house, the status, and the illusion she had prized above all else. As she set the pen down, she looked completely empty. The contrast was deeply ironic. The woman who had sneered at my first home, claiming I could never afford it, was now sitting across from me, penniless, forced to hand over the keys to her own castle just to avoid federal fraud charges. Merrick gathered the papers, stamped them, and nodded. You have 14 days to pack. Leave the keys on the kitchen counter. Hayes wheeled me out of the conference room. I did not look back. I did not need to. The chapter was permanently closed. Time is a relentless force, capable of healing deep physical wounds while simultaneously cementing the consequences of our actions. 6 months passed since the horrific accident that fundamentally fractured my reality. My recovery was grueling, demanding every ounce of my willpower. I spent countless hours in agonizing physical therapy, learning how to walk again on my reconstructed femur. The chest tube was long gone, leaving only a faded, jagged scar beneath my ribs. But every time the pain flared, I would look at Romy, who was now a thriving, giggling infant, and remember exactly why I fought so hard to survive. The landscape of my family had drastically, permanently altered. The karmic retribution was not abstract, it was intensely physical, entirely tangible, and deeply ironic. 14 days after signing the quitclaim deed, Arletta and Orson vacated the massive Oakbrook estate. I hired a ruthless real estate agent to sell the property. Because the housing market was booming, it sold quickly and significantly above asking price. The proceeds cleared the original mortgage, releasing Grandpa Gideon from any liability, and the remaining profit, which amounted to nearly the exact $626,000 I had invested over the years. was deposited directly into my accounts. I did not spend a dime of it on luxury. I took that massive sum and locked it into a high-yield trust fund for Romy. Her future was entirely, irrevocably secure. As for my parents, reality hit them with the force of a freight train. Stripped of their stolen wealth and alienated from their high society friends, they were forced to downsize to a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a noisy, undesirable part of town. Because they had zero retirement savings of their own, Orson was forced to abandon his golf clubs and take a job working the graveyard shift as a security guard at a local distribution warehouse. Arletta, who had spent a decade bragging about her elite lifestyle and mocking working-class people, was forced to swallow her immense pride and take a minimum-wage job as a cashier at a large retail supermarket. I heard about their struggles occasionally through the grapevine. A mutual acquaintance told me they saw Arletta at the supermarket, wearing a polyester uniform, her hands rough and cracked from scanning groceries for 8 hours a day. She reportedly looked exhausted, bitter, and utterly defeated. I felt no joy in hearing this, but I also felt absolutely zero guilt. They were finally experiencing the life they actually earned. Vesper's fate was equally poetic. Without the endless flow of stolen cash to fund her extravagant lifestyle blog, her fake influencer empire collapsed overnight. She could no longer afford the designer clothes, the aesthetic coffee shop visits, or the luxury travel that defined her online persona. Her followers quickly abandoned her. But her real downfall came from within the family. Aunt Bryony, infuriated by the revelation that Vesper had scammed her out of $5,000, took Vesper to small claims court. The judge ruled in Bryony's favor, legally ordering Vesper to garnish her wages to repay the debt. Vesper was forced to abandon her blogging dreams and take a job as an entry-level customer service representative in a bleak call center, wearing a headset and dealing with angry customers all day just to pay off her angry aunt. In a moment of pure, desperate panic, Vesper actually tried to call me. She left a sobbing, frantic voicemail, begging me to help her, claiming she was drowning in debt and that our parents could not help her anymore. I listened to the voicemail once, staring at the scar on my leg. I remembered her sneaking into my office, stealing my emergency cash while I was bleeding in an ambulance. I pressed delete and permanently blocked her number. Some bridges are not just burned, they are obliterated with dynamite, and the ashes are scattered to the wind. Through it all, Grandpa Gideon remained a steadfast, towering pillar of support. He visited our house every Sunday without fail. He would sit in the rocking chair on our back porch, holding Romy, telling her stories about his days in the military and the true meaning of honor. He had officially updated his will, cutting Arletta, Orson, and Vesper out entirely, leaving his entire estate to me and Romy. He was the only biological family I had left, and he was the only one I truly needed. The $626,000 was a massive, painful price to pay for a lesson in family dynamics. For years, I mourned the loss of the money. But as I sat on my porch, watching Hayes teach Romy how to hold a plastic spoon, I realized something profound. I did not lose that money. I used it to buy my absolute freedom. I paid a heavy ransom to escape a hostage situation I did not even realize I was trapped in. I was no longer the invisible scapegoat. I was no longer the silent ATM. I was Sutton, a survivor, a mother, and a woman who had finally learned the true, undeniable value of her own worth. It is a warm, golden Sunday afternoon, almost 2 years to the day since the metal of that delivery truck tore into my car and altered the trajectory of my entire existence. The scars on my body have faded to pale white lines, quiet reminders of the battle I fought and won. We're hosting a backyard barbecue at our house. The smell of grilled burgers and sweet corn fills the air. Hayes is standing by the grill, wearing a ridiculous apron that says Grill Master, laughing loudly at a joke Merrick just told. Grandpa Gideon is sitting in his favorite patio chair, a contented smile on his weathered face, gently bouncing a 2-year-old Romy on his knee as she babbles happily at him. This is my family. It is not the family I was born into, but it is the family I actively chose, and more importantly, the family that actively chooses me every single day. I look around the yard, taking in the profound peace of this moment. There are no passive-aggressive comments about my career. There are no frantic, panicked demands for emergency cash transfers. There is no anxiety gnawing at the edge of my mind, waiting for the other shoe to drop. There is only safety, respect, and genuine, unconditional love. I learned a harsh, unforgiving truth in the wreckage of that car crash. DNA does not make you family. Blood is a biological fact, not a moral obligation. True family is defined by loyalty, by shared sacrifice, and by showing up when the world is falling apart. Arletta, Orson, and Vesper shared my DNA, but they were never my family. They were parasites who found a willing host in a desperate, lonely daughter. The moment the host stopped providing nourishment, their true, monstrous nature was revealed. Sometimes, I still receive letters in the mail from Arletta. They are always written in frantic, looping cursive, filled with endless complaints about how hard her retail job is, how terrible her small apartment smells, and how unfair her life has become. She never asks how my leg is healing. She never asks if Romy is walking yet. She only talks about her own manufactured misery, hoping to evoke a spark of the misplaced guilt that used to control me. I do not read them anymore. I take the envelopes, unopened, and feed them directly into the paper shredder in my home office. It is a small, satisfying ritual that reminds me of the boundary I have permanently established. If there is anyone out there listening to this story who is currently trapped in the role of the family ATM, I need you to hear this with absolute clarity. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. You cannot buy love, respect, or genuine affection. If they only value you for the financial utility you provide, they do not value you at all. They only value the convenience of your sacrifice. Walking away from the people who raised you is one of the most agonizing, terrifying decisions a person can make. Society conditions us to believe that family is everything, that we must forgive every transgression, and that cutting off a parent is a cardinal sin. But society does not sit in the crushed metal of a car wreck while your mother chooses a vacation over your life. Protecting your peace is not a selfish act, it is an act of profound self-preservation. It takes immense courage to look at the people you desperately want to love you, accept that they never will, and walk away to build a life entirely without them. The $626,000 is safely locked away in a trust fund for my daughter. Romy will go to college without the crushing weight of student loans. She will have a down payment for her first home. She will start her adult life with a massive advantage, completely insulated from the financial anxiety that plagued my early 20s. But the greatest gift I will ever give her is not the money. The greatest gift is the guarantee that she will never have to endure the toxic, conditional love that almost destroyed her mother. She will grow up knowing that her worth is not tied to her utility. She will know she is loved simply because she exists. So, here is my final question for you, the jury of the internet. The extended relatives on my mother's side still occasionally whisper that I am a cold-blooded monster. They say that taking the Oakbrook house and pushing my elderly parents into menial labor and a cramped apartment was a step too far. They argue that despite everything, Arletta is still my mother, and I should have shown her some mercy in her twilight years. What do you think? Did I cross a line by taking everything they had and leaving them to face the harsh reality of their own incompetence? Did I overreact, or did I deliver the exact brand of justice they deserved? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you resonated with this experience and you want to support the channel, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like on the video. It helps me bring more of these incredible stories to light. Stay strong, protect your boundaries, and never let anyone treat you like an option. See you in the next one.